Thank you, Alan. My name is Nicole Dieroff, and I serve as Program Director at the BTS Center. I'm excited to introduce the next part of our Convocation agenda, where we get to be part of something that's even bigger than those of us gathered here. We are going to have the opportunity to witness and contribute to a live recording of Rob Hopkins' podcast, From What If to What Next, which has a diverse international audience. Recently, his podcast took on topics like, what if the majority of the news was positive news? And what if energy generation was in community hands? Today, we'll be exploring the question, what if faith communities were a critical part of the emerging imagination infrastructure? Rob Hopkins is co-founder of Transition Network, an environmental activist, innovator, and the author of several books, including this one, From What Is to What If, Unleashing the Power of Imagination to Create the Future We Want, where each chapter is a what if question, like, what if we considered imagination vital to our health? And what if we became better storytellers? And what if our leaders prioritized the cultivation of imagination? This book has truly become one of the grounding texts for the BTS Center as we work to nurture spiritual leadership in a climate-changed world. We ran an Unlocking Possibilities speaker series and peer learning community where we brought in guests from many different sectors to imagine a new democracy, a new planet, and more. We did a multi-session book study on From What Is to What If, which we affectionately called Fui Tui, because it sounds like birdsong. Building on that book study, we partnered with a handful of congregations who created projects intended to spark the imaginations of their people, including one that decided to take a season to play with the space outside their building, rotating it from a pop-up labyrinth one week to a pop-up vegetable garden another week, and asking their neighbors to engage with them as they imagined what that space could be for the larger community. And right now we are running a 6-month small church leadership community called Fostering Imagination, Building the Resilient Church, where we selected 6 congregations from many more applicants to step into today's realities of dramatic change with curiosity and faith, adopting practices that nurture resilience and embrace imaginative possibilities. I know that many of our small church leadership community members are here with us today. And if you are one of them, I invite you to say hello to Rob in the chat and share what faith community you are part of. Those congregations have been exploring the 4 quadrants of the imagination sundial: space, place, practices, and pacts. Ben, could you kindly put the link to Rob's sundial in the chat so people who are not familiar with it can access it? This is all to say that you, Rob, have gotten us imagining. So thank you for your good work, your important work in the world, and thank you for saying yes to doing a live recording of your podcast during Convocation. Before we shift and invite you to put on your podcast hosting hat, I wonder if you might share a few things just with us. Last night, as part of Convocation, the Reverend Dr. Veronis Miles preached a sermon in which she identified a collective dearth of imagination as part of what we're up against in these times. Could you speak to your understanding of that collective dearth of imagination?
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you. It's such a thrill to be here. And it's always lovely when you write something and then actually people not only read it, but they then do something with it. And so I feel really humbled to be here and to hear that. It's kind of any activist or author's dream. So thank you so much. Yeah, well, Ursula Le Guin once wrote, she said, it is above all by the imagination that we achieve perception and compassion and hope. And I feel like the thing that really motivated me to research the book and write the book was I kept reading people like Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein, climate activists I'm sure you'll all be aware of, and Amitav Ghosh, and people who kept saying climate change is a failure of the imagination. and it really got under my skin, this idea of, well, why are we having a failure of the imagination in 2022? Could that be a thing, and if so, why? I remember speaking to people whose opinions I really respected, and said, would anybody actually read a book about imagination? Is this a total waste of my time? And they all said, no, no, I think you should give it a go. So what's been I feel like what the climate scientists, and I spend quite a lot of time talking with climate scientists, what they say is, um, that we have to reimagine everything. We can't negotiate with physics, or we've believed we can for too long, but we really can't. And so we can either choose whether we are the people who looked this crisis square in the face and decided to move because um, because we felt deep in ourselves that this was a historic invitation to move towards something infinitely more delicious and nourishing and satisfying and fulfilling than what we have now. Or we can choose to be the people who just have to be sort of dragged kicking and screaming away, and no, 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 it's unimaginable, we can't do anything else. So for me, it's been such a fascinating journey to really understand, well, what is imagination? Why does it matter? And actually, what I wanted to do with the book was to say, just over here, slightly out of our field of vision, this most precious, precious thing, the thing that distinguishes us as human beings from all other creation, this ability to tell stories and imagine and to think, what is over the other side of that hill? What if is kind of desiccating and contracting and shriveling. And I wanted to put it back in the middle of the table and say, no, 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 this is really important. This really matters, and it's fundamental to all change. And Walida Imarisha, in her book Octavia's Brood, she wrote, all organizing is science fiction, which I think is so powerful, that all change making is about stories and imagination and storytelling. And we need to get so much better at that.
Thank you. Well, I so appreciate the way you speak to us very clearly, saying imagination is something you can do as a human being. You don't need any other qualifier. Being a human being taps allows us to tap into imagination. And your book names many ways in which our society is set up right now that really squashes that. And so we sort of need to be active. We need to be active in countering the squashing, which is where the sundial, I think, comes in so powerfully. Um, and our small church leadership community has been exploring the 4 segments of that sundial. I wonder if you might want to just pick one, tell us a little more about it, and maybe share a non-church example. We've been collecting church examples, but maybe share a non-church example that might be inspiring for us out of that
Yeah,
quadrant.
yeah. So the first part of it is space, and it's the observation that the imagination needs space. Everybody on this call knows that the times when you're at your most imaginative is when you have space, not when you're overwhelmed or stressed or
Mm,
really anxious. Albert Einstein always said he got his best ideas when he rode his bicycle in the forest. And that
mm,
kind of daydreamy sort of space is really disappearing very quickly out of our lives. We all carry in our pockets these highly addictive devices that just devour that time when 20 years ago we might have gone for a walk and written a poem or done some daydreaming. Now we think, oh, I must just check my Instagram, and
yeah.
that space, that opportunity is gone. A story that I love about space, in a couple of different meanings of the word space, is from Zambia in 1964, where Zambia had just become an independent nation after decades of British colonial rule. And a guy called Edward Makuka Nkoloso announced the Zambian space program. He said, no, actually, the first person in space, this is when America and Russia were competing to get there first. He said, no, no, the first person in space will be a young woman from Zambia, and I'm building
Hmm,
a. And he wrote letters to governments all around the world and said, please send me loads of money so I can do this. And nobody sent him anything. And it didn't actually work. And he trained his astronauts for weightlessness in space by rolling them down a hill in an old oil drum. It was beautiful. And then it didn't work. And then the whole thing fell apart. and that people largely forgot his story. But then when he died in 1989, he was buried with the highest honors the Zambian government could give to their citizens, because what he did was he opened that story in
Mm.
that space, in that culture, to say, we could do anything. We're newly in the independent nation. We could be anything we want. And I think we really need to be able to tell those big stories and open up spaces like that in our culture.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for this short moment of exchange between us. And now we get to invite you to shift gears, and we get to be part of the thing that you do for the broader world. I'm going to ask our convocation musician, Reggie Harris, to sing with us as a way of moving from our little conversation into the live podcast recording. After the song, we'll all hold silence for just a moment, and then you'll hear the introduction to Rob's podcast, and we'll be in it, watching the magic happen live. So thank you in advance to Reggie and Rob and Keisha and Shannon, who you'll get to be introduced to very soon.
Well, you can find this song on page 6. It's an elemental chant. And it just simply says, the earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, 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 oh, aye, oh, aye, oh, aye, oh.
Welcome to a very, very special episode of From What If to What Next. I'm Rob Hopkins, and it's my delight to welcome you here. This episode is being recorded live before a virtual audience at the BTS Center's Convocation 2022, whose theme is Imagination and Collective Liberation for a Climate-Changed World. It's an event which is setting out to explore what it means to nourish our imaginations towards a world of joyful possibility and embodied hope, while also holding space for the difficult realities we are facing. The BTS Center is a private foundation in Portland, Maine, built on the legacy of the former Bangor Theological Seminary. Guided by a vision of human hearts renewed, justice established, and creation restored, the BTS Center offers theologically grounded programs of continuing education and spiritual formation, including workshops and retreats, learning cohorts, public conversations, and projects of applied research, all focused around spiritual leadership in a climate changed world. And at this point, I usually point out that this podcast is only able to exist and do what it does thanks to our community at patreon.com/from what if to what next, who subscribe and enable these podcasts to sound as good as they do and to reach as many people as possible. And if you felt like joining them, you would be most welcome. And so to today's episode. Today, we're going to be exploring the role of faith communities in unleashing the revolution of the imagination that we so urgently need. In these times where climate change is unfolding at pace and action to deal with it remains glacially slow, how can faith and faith groups help the world in doing the reimagining that is needed? While in the US, some of those most effectively slowing action and undermining public support for climate policy use their faith to justify their actions, there are also many, as we'll hear today, for whom the opposite is absolutely true, and for whom faith is a critical part of how we respond, how we support each other, how we find the resilience and the energy to keep fighting for a livable future. So our question for today's episode of From What If to What Next, therefore, is what if faith communities were a critical part of the emerging imagination infrastructure? And I'm joined today by two amazing guests to help explore this question. Dr. Keisha E. McKenzie is Senior Vice President for Programs at Auburn Seminary, a multi-faith center that catalyzes leaders of faith and moral courage, cultivates multiracial justice movements, and changes social narratives through research and mass action. Keisha leads Auburn's Thriving in Ministry project, which is co-hosting this spiritual ecology gathering with the BTCS is a tire repair company near where I live. I got that wrong. Sorry. The BTS Center, raised Seventh-day Adventist and educated in the UK, Jamaica, and West Texas. Keisha has come to understand communication, religion, and politics as technologies we can use for social change. She believes that all people have inherent worth and dignity and were made for a world where every soul can flourish, and people of faith have a key role in making that world real for us all. And Shannon Shah is a director of Faith for the Climate. He balances careers in human rights advocacy, journalism, and theatre and music in his native Malaysia before relocating to London in 2010, just over there a little way. And he holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from King's College London and is a fellow of the London-based Muslim Institute, where he's senior deputy editor of its flagship quarterly publication, Critical Muslim. He also conducts research for the Information Network Focus on Religious Movements, an independent educational charity based at King's College London, and is a tutor in Islam at the University of London worldwide. Wow. Welcome both of you to From What If to What Next.
An absolute pleasure, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. And I'd love to start by inviting you both to just step over here and to join me in my time machine. And for those of you who are new here, it's how we start every episode. I built my time machine funded with a grant from my local tourism agency, actually, who could see the opportunities to greatly expand the opportunities for visitors to my town. But I use it for this podcast mostly to take my guests forward in time to 2030 to see how it turned out. It's important to note that it's a very particular 2030 that we're traveling to. It's not a utopia, and it's also not a dystopia, but it's rather the result of our having done everything we could possibly have done, every option that was open to us. And those 8 years felt like we lived through a revolution of the imagination, a thrilling time when anything felt possible. I spent this morning just checking the disbelief suspenders were properly calibrated and that the cynicism regulators were charged. So I think we're ready to go. So Keisha, if you might sit over here, and Shannon, you could take the sofa over there. And if you might just close your eyes. And if you're listening, you might like to do the same too. And to imagine that we're leaving 2022 and traveling through those years between, and you can feel them rush past like wind on your face. And now as we circle to come into land in that 2030, and as I pop open the doors, that's it, and you could just unfasten your seatbelts now, I'd like to ask if you might both take us on a walk in that 2030 out there, the future that emerged because faith communities played a critical role in building that imagination infrastructure that made all of this future possible. What does it feel like and taste like and look like and smell like? Take us on a walk, Keisha.
Rob, I think we've reimagined the scale of our community just in time to adapt to this new world that we're in. Now in 2030, I can cycle 2.5 miles to the grocery store on a dedicated bike lane, because after the COVID pandemic finally ended, I and everybody who bought pedal assist bicycles in that first grim year finally got new places to ride them. So I no longer have to worry about SUVs clipping me as they come around the corner, but I still have to watch out for the squirrels crossing the road because it feels like there's more of them now. 4-day work weeks were once imagined by Tim Ferriss and Basecamp and other life optimizers, but they're now as common as weekends. And they give us all more space and time to ride and to connect with each other and to listen to new emerging shared dreams. My Jack Russell terrorist, Cosmo, he's still with us, and he's 8 years older now, but he still loves to play. He's still delighted by snacks and by life itself. He still reminds me to touch the grass and smell the earth for signs of others in our ecosystem and to protect those who are precious to me. You can see around the corner, every lawn has a community garden on it because neighborhood food sharing networks have cropped up in communities all over the country. In our garden, we're trading herbs for squash and tomatoes for eggs. Our rolling church lawn also houses an expanded kale and cabbage patch and chickens. So all the elders in the neighborhood have food to eat because we make sure that they do. There's a verse in Acts that says all the believers were together and had everything in common. And that's the world that we're in right now. Breaking bread in our homes and eating together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. Thanks for being with me in 2030.
Beautiful. Thank you, Keisha, so much. Shannon.
Well, I'm still living in London, in central London, where my partner he's a Church of England priest, and he is the vicar of an inner city church in London. I'm Muslim, he's Christian, we share a life together still. I'm very much a part of his church community. And my study in the vicarage is overlooking the church. And I'm amazed at how much actually still feels the same. The churchyard, the sense of community, the building. But there's a part of me that has to pinch myself because I think, when did I stop hearing so many police sirens? I can't hear them anymore. I don't even see any police around. They're just not here. And this is a neighborhood that once upon a time was known for knife crime and rough sleeping and quite heavy-handed policing, and I don't see that. I don't hear the sirens of ambulances anymore because I guess people are just not falling as sick as they were. The air is not as polluted. The hospitals are working well and funded well. And there's a Montessori kindergarten behind us. So I'm not saying that the place is completely quiet. It's actually loud, but it's loud with the sound of kids just playing in the churchyard, their teachers just laughing with them. We live in the middle of a district in London with lots of universities and university halls as well. And instead of hearing students rushing around stressed and preoccupied with their gadgets, I'm actually hearing them having fun and interacting with each other. And I don't feel harassed now the way I used to. I'm not in my study thinking, oh, why can't these people be quiet? I'm trying to work here. Instead, I feel really juicy. If I was a fruit, I'm feeling really succulent and juicy, and I'm just waiting for someone to bite into me. And everyone else around me is really juicy and I'm really enjoying them as well. That's what it feels like. And that's just the world around me. That's just within, I don't know, a half-mile radius around me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I've done this now. This will be our 65th, 66th episode. We've never had anyone describe themselves as a juicy fruit before. So thank you for bringing that. That's beautiful. So I'd love to start. Thank you both so much for doing that, by the way. And I'd love to start by asking you both what for you faith communities do well, what they're good at that this world facing the multiple challenges that it faces needs. What do they bring to this? Shannon.
Well, spoiler alert, I am a social scientist from quite a qualitative background. So I do ethnography, and I'm much better at going from a micro perspective and then telescoping out. So this question makes me think of an experience I had last year when I was quite new to my post in Faith for the Climate. And we in the UK were trying to mobilize faith communities in the lead up to the UN climate talks, COP26 in Glasgow last year. And we were trying to give a story to the different faith communities in the UK of what we could do, what we could bring to the table, what was our unique selling point. Actually, I don't like the phrase unique selling point because that sounds a bit capitalist. We're not products, we're not selling things. But anyway, what was it that we were bringing? And a group of South London churches got in touch with me to sort of speak at one of their, I think at the annual general meeting of churches together in South London, just to explain what Faith for the Climate was doing on climate. And at that stage, we were really trying to push for a narrative of reparations. So we as communities in the global north, from a former colonial power, really have to take charge of the carbon debt, the climate debt that we owe to the rest of the world, right? And there is something that faith communities can do about this. We can have the moral standing and the spiritual vision, the spiritual grounding to really get this message across. So I explained all of this. And of course, when you talk about reparations, I was talking about cyclones and droughts and famines. And I think I was really making quite a few people feel depressed. What happened was at some stage, and this was in Holy Week, this was in Lent, like, you know, at that crossover between Lent and then Holy Week leading up to Good Friday, leading up to Easter. And someone asked a question and said, oh God, what do I do with all this despair then? You've just really made me feel very despairing and anxious. And I had to take a breath and I said, but aren't we in the middle of Holy Week? Isn't this when Christians contemplate on the Stations of the Cross, of this sham trial of Jesus, just because he was telling people to love each other and to care for the poor and excluded? And that was the kingdom of God for him. That is the kingdom of God. And what happened to him? He was crucified and people were destroyed. On Good Friday, you're actually all in mourning because God has died. So what I said to this crowd was, you have a faith that is based on dealing with grief. There is no resurrection without crucifixion, right? So this is what you hold on to. Now, what was amazing was not that I surprised myself by doing Christian theology on the fly. This was also in Ramadan. And I was telling people, look, I'm a Muslim. I'm going to go off and break my Ramadan fast in a minute. What was amazing also was this group of Christians in South London were like, wow, you are a Muslim and you have just given us liberation Christian theology. And I was like, thank you very much. That's what I'm here for. I mean, that sounds a bit flippant, but I mean, I think this is what faith communities can bring as well. We can go deep into our own traditions and really find sources of inspiration and imagination there. But we can also talk to each other. It's a bit like having different spiritual languages to write poetry about the same thing. So I know what spiritual poetry looks like from a Muslim perspective. And talking to a group of grassroots Christians in London, I was able to activate something also because my partner is Christian, that I could draw upon this Christian story to speak to them as well. So I think that you know, that example, I think, encapsulates what you're asking about what faith communities can offer.
Thank you, beautiful. Keisha.
So I love the question of the spiritual resources, the story resources that each of our traditions offer us. Alongside that, I'm thinking about what I call the 3 Ps for faith communities, which is presence, play, and participation. And so I was raised Seventh-day Adventist in a largely immigrant Caribbean community in London, South London. Adventism is a fundamentalist tradition that still retains this thread of progress and prophecy, which is good because I think that's probably the only reason it still survives in this world. When these communities are inhabiting this idea of presence, they are practicing solidarity with communities that are vulnerable, whether that's vulnerable because of food injustice or vulnerable because of mass incarceration or economic injustice otherwise. And they come alongside folks and they meet their direct, concrete, physical needs and form community around them and just show up with them and live with them. And that's the inhabited or embodied function of the faith community in its neighborhood context. When these communities are inhabiting this idea of play, they're building spaces for creativity and transcendence through music that's shared with the neighbors and creating art that gives people a space to reflect and pause from the rush of outside. Or themselves, they're practicing play together by creating small groups where they might go play tennis or go on long group walks and dropping out of the bureaucracy of running a congregation or the bureaucracy of running a ministry and like giving them space to feel human and to drop out of time and to bond with each other. When they're inhabiting participation, they're now training each other to really dig into their shared stake in what happens in their community life and not training each other to defer agency to a visible leader. They're practicing shared governance, what we might call democracy, shared responsibility, common practice. These are some of that's the ordinary work, I think, of what faith community lived out looks like. And I talked to a pastor friend who pastors in California a couple of weeks ago and asked him about that. And these are some of the stories that he was telling me, stories about having taken an ordinary congregation, a small group of people in their community to help them think about what do the folks around us actually need? Is that space for people living with addiction? Is that the community garden that I imagined in 2030? Is it something much more concrete? Or is it just time to play and not be so serious as people of faith that we don't have time to play a quick game of tennis and like throw off some steam and sweat a little bit and enjoy life and be joyous and have glint in our eye because we're enthusiastic about living. I think the other element of faith community that is valuable is this idea of third space. Third space not being your home where you come from or your work where you have to be, but voluntary association where you're choosing to be. Sociologically, and Shannon may be able to speak more to this, would be third space is where the cultural distinctions don't really apply. Classes tend to be flattened. I think of sometimes sports clubs or cafes. You don't know who's next to you around the coffee table. They might have a PhD, they might be a plumber, but you're there to share the coffee and you'll have a conversation and you might fill in the gaps later. And we really desperately need more spaces like that everywhere in society, whether they are formally faith communities or not. But I think faith communities can be one of the first spaces where people are experiencing that quality of like declassing and less polarization, even though in this moment, faith communities are increasingly politically polarized and sometimes now socially polarized, but the opportunity is really there to have that space where we get to connect as humans beyond the boxes that we're plopped in by our culture.
Beautiful. Thank you. And previously on this podcast, we've explored the different ways in which colonialism, patriarchy, white supremacy, economic inequality can rob people of their imaginations, as Adrienne Marie Brown, who we had on episode 50, put it in her book Emergent Strategy. Reclaiming the right to dream the future, strengthening the muscle to imagine together as Black people is a revolutionary decolonizing activity. We are living in the ancestral imagination of others, a longing that didn't include us. It is our right and responsibility to write ourselves into the future. How can faith help people to unpick that and to overcome the grief and the anxiety, the self-doubt that those things succeed by spreading? Keisha.
So there's part of the Passover Haggadah, which is the ritual text that Jews will sing and discuss as they observe the festival every year, that reflects on the story of Exodus, of the children of Israel's liberation from Egypt. A couple years ago, a friend shared her family Haggadah a few years ago with me, and we were able to talk a little bit about how the Jewish community reads those stories and how Black people across generations and across hemispheres have experienced that story, interpreted it through our own histories of trafficking, enslavement, and emancipation. And this goes back to something that Shannon said just a few minutes ago about the rich well of story, myth, and tradition in our faith communities. We have in our scriptures like all these hero journeys and cautionary tales that we can use as resources to like build deep conversations about history and current realities of oppression, models for letting the new people go, like Moses did once upon a time, or warnings about what it's like to accommodate empire, like Joseph. We have these models, and we have these cautions, and we have these memes and themes that we can use in conversation with people to talk about what got us here, what's happening around us, and how we might get out to a new place of freedom and liberation. And so I think breaking it down to text study is one way to look at it, but nobody's gonna jump on a bus for text study unless you're like me and a big nerd. But I think like being able to say, let's gather around this story that's been so precious to our community over generations, and let's do like Reggie and sing a song about it that helps us not just think our way into these new realities, but emotionally connect with them so they are alive in us, and translate them into stories and forms that a nursery kid can get onto as much as a grandmother and somebody who's busy working. But these ways of engaging these resources, I think, are essential, really, in helping us reimagine, repair, and legacy and lineage in new ways.
Thank you, Shannon.
I think the way that I connect best with this question is through personal experience, because I was born and raised Muslim in Malaysia. And as you've heard from me introducing my partner before, you'll also know that I'm a gay man. And for the longest time, I just couldn't imagine how I could live as a gay man and a Muslim. I thought something had to give. And so in my early 20s, I just went through a period of intense spiritual and personal crisis. And I really felt like my world was falling apart, and that really I would never be able to imagine a full and whole existence until I discovered some online communities of other queer Muslims who had come together and set up something called queer jihad. Now, jihad has a kind of negative sting now because of media stereotypes of what it means, but basically it just means struggle. It's a holy struggle. So these queer Muslims were talking about their holy struggle to stay queer and stay Muslim. And I think just discovering something like that changed my life. And at the same time, I discovered an Islamic feminist organization in Malaysia called Sisters in Islam. And they were reading the Quran through a liberationist feminist lens. And I had never seen anything like this before. And one of the things I learned from Sisters in Islam that I had never encountered in my traditional Muslim upbringing was a story from one of the founders of one of the Sunni schools of jurisprudence. So I'm from a Sunni Muslim background in Malaysia. So this is the Imam Malik, who wrote a compendium of his religious opinions, the Muwatta. And the caliph at the time the Abbasid Caliph liked his opinion so much that the Caliph wanted to make them law across the Muslim territories and basically wanted to paste them on the doors of the Kaaba, the holy shrine of Islam in Mecca. Now, what Imam Malik said to the Caliph is, don't do that. You cannot do that, because different Muslims in different parts of the world would have received different information that would give them different perspectives. And you cannot just override all their perspectives. So do not do this, because diversity of opinion is God's gift to humanity. Now, when I came across this story that I'd never come across before until I met Sisters in Islam, I had a lot of grief and I felt really robbed, but I also felt like I was reborn. And I finally felt it was possible to imagine that I could do this. And I could not only do this, I could take it somewhere as well. I could be the human rights activist I wanted to be, and be a queer man, and be a Muslim, and be a feminist. So I think it's these relationships of mentorship and spiritual companionship that faith communities can also bring to, you know, the whole discourse of decolonizing, because it sounds like it's a political project, sure, but it's a project that has to be born out of community connections and relationships of care, and the ability to allow people to feel afraid and make mistakes and not have the right opinion and say the wrong things. Yeah, so I'll pause there for a minute.
Oh, beautiful, thank you. I wonder how you both see the tension between religious organizations and structures, between the more conservative nature of existing religious institutional infrastructures, the training schools, the clerics, the theologians, the rituals, the often conservative traditions, and the need that the climate emergency, the social justice emergency, etc., create for us to reimagine everything. Can faith communities move fast enough? Can they reimagine things fast enough? And if not, where do we see the best examples of people overcoming that and adding in that ability for faith groups to be more nimble and more imaginative? Shannon.
I think I will have to have a qualifier here, because the two traditions I know the best are Islam and Christianity, and even then I come with a particular vantage point, so I can't speak to non-monotheistic or non-Abrahamic faiths. But in these religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, I know a bit about as well, there's always a prophetic strand in each of these faiths and a priestly strand that tries to protect the status quo. And they're all within the same compendium of texts. And it really depends who has the power to stitch together a narrative of what this faith is meant to stand for. Is it a prophetic faith of witness, of justice, or is it a priestly faith that tries to defend the status quo? And from a sociological perspective, I don't think that is I don't think religious communities have a monopoly on this dynamic. I think we see these sorts of sectarianisms in many different political movements as well, including in the social justice sector. So I think that's not new. I think where I would go is to really, I guess what I said earlier about going deep and noticing these things within the tradition. I think because I come from a background where so many stories of Islam were made unavailable to me and were silenced for me. I think discovering them is still magical, realizing that these things exist in the tradition. And now that I have a partner who's introduced me to, you know, the Christianity that he practices, I mean, it really blew my mind to think this book, the Book of Revelation, which I think has been so maligned in so many spaces in pop culture, you can actually read that as resistance literature. It's like what you were asking us earlier, Rob, what would the world look like in 2030? I think we can pick out passages from the Book of Revelation and say, this is liberation theology. This is what this heavenly city looks like. So I think I would hold on to that and notice how those echoes show up in present struggles that may be made invisible to us as well because of power dynamics. I'm thinking of liberation struggles in Palestine and the value of sumud, this Palestinian value of steadfastness and resilience in the face of occupation that is non-violent, but is also assertive and is brave and is courageous, and it's cultural, but it also has very spiritual roots in Palestine between Palestinian Muslims and Christians, and with their Jewish allies in Palestine as well. So that's my bias. I would just go with the prophetic liberatory strands and just still discover them because they've just been denied to someone like me for such a long time.
Thank you. Keisha.
So I think what Shannon's picking out is the ways that faith communities not only have these resources to offer the world, but also the faith communities need to take their own medicine and imbibe the best of those spiritual resources as well, because it's not as if faith operates outside of all of these patterns of oppression. So we're talking about Shannon being inspired by feminist Muslims, or feminism in Islam needs to be there in part because of their experience in Islam. Christianity in my community was definitely shaped by the waves of women organizing and creating cultural change in the 60s and 70s, and it literally changed how women had access, or whether women had access to ordination and spiritual leadership within our tradition. So it's never, I don't want to give the impression that it's a one-way journey, that only the faith communities have something for outside, but also outside has many, many things to offer and invite the faith communities to pull all the bureaucracy away and remember the priestly strand and remember the prophetic strand. I see the priestly strand not only as protective and not only as conservative or conserving the tradition, but also in terms of priest as chaplain. And if this moment is a moment where people are experiencing deep ecological grief, but also grief around 4 centuries of racialized economic oppression, well, the priest has something to do. The priest has a role to play in helping to frame models of repair and in helping to name the evil that has created the system in which we live, both in terms of unchecked colonialism and unchecked consumption and unchecked power and control and assertion over people who are then pushed to the edges of the field. Widows, orphans, poor people, queer people, Black people, etc. So I think about us before we think about what we can offer the planet, thinking about how our spiritual resources can help us make repair for the church's contribution. I speak as a Christian, church's contribution to the systems that we have to dismantle. Enslavement and colonialism and genocide all were entangled with Christian denominations, from Roman Catholic to Dutch Reformed to Church of England, including, people who are known as abolitionists, like the Quakers. They were Quaker slaveholders, not so far from where I live now, which was a surprise to me. But we each in these traditions get to reckon with that history and think about how our traditions testify against us in some ways, and how we can be spiritually humble enough to recognize that, make repair for it in the design choices we make as we design new ways of being community. And then a good example of this, I think, is in Trinity UCC, is a church congregation that's in Chicago. The senior minister is part of Auburn's community, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss. And that community looked at, what do people a couple miles down the street really need in this moment? Do they have access to grocery stores? They didn't. Do they have access to work opportunities? They didn't. Were they returning citizens from prison who couldn't find employment? Therefore, what do they need? They need a center that has sustainable design baked into it from the beginning, that includes a vision for a community garden, that employs them to do the development and actual construction, that provides a medical facility for people who could not access medical care. And the process of the congregation rallying around this vision is in itself a way of spiritually resourcing themselves and the community. It's not just about what we can do for us, it's also about what we are doing with others, and answering the oppressive histories of our world in the specific issues that I mentioned with a generative vision for something that's new and that changes them as they seek to make it real. So that's kind of the themes that I wanted to make sure we got to, so that there wasn't this idea that it's only that we have the good news to share, but also that the world is good news and we get to experience it as well with others.
Thank you. And that kind of leads us into my next question, which is that many people who come to the climate emergency, who work as activists, myself included, often talk about their dark night of the soul, that moment when the true scale and the implications of this challenge really land, and the grief and the pain and the rage that accompanies that. What can faith teach us about the dark night of the soul, and how best to navigate it, how best to manage that kind of ecological grief and enable it to propel us forward into action rather than it being something that really paralyzes us? Keisha.
So I'm drawing on the experiences of colleagues who are part of Extinction Rebellion and do climate chaplaincy. One of my colleagues, Minister Matt Dean, is a pastor in Vermont, and one of my colleagues at Auburn, and he's been thinking since seminary about how to hold ritual space for people to name, acknowledge, hold, and move the grief that naturally arises from our reckoning with what's going on, the stakes for the ecology, the impacts that we're having on our animal companions and plant allies right now. And I think that it's absolutely obvious to me that faith communities and faith leaders would be among the people trying to design those rituals for the community, to see what's happening and reckon with it and hold it and not run away from it, to chaplain them as they try to hold it, and to answer the call of the grief to build a new world through interspiritual chaplaincy for others, or multi-issue advocacy to directly confront the policies that are creating the world we're in, or to use those spiritual resources that we talked about to retrain local communities and congregations. All of those specific mechanisms, I think, are what I see people being drawn to. But absolutely, you have to move through it first yourself to get there. So you can't just jump into action, but you have to be willing to shed a tear for where we are now, or maybe several. And as I was thinking about this question a little bit earlier, for the first time, perhaps, the Psalm 23, this line in there, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." That came up to me in the context of holding the depth of grief that we're in and not shying away from it. Yea, though I walk through that grief. I'm walking through it, I'm not running away, I'm not pretending it's something less than it is, but I'm still walking.
Thank you. Shannon.
I love what Keisha just said, and I love this question. And I'll start with what it makes me think of immediately. These are lines from the 13th century Islamic mystic Jalaluddin Rumi. Some of you might know this poem. I think it goes something like, I said, what about my eyes? He said, keep them on the road. I said, what about my passion? He said, keep it burning. I said, what about my heart? He said, tell me what's in your heart. I said, pain and sorrow. He said, stay with it, because the wound is how the light enters you. I think that to me is the recipe for a dark night of the soul, to stay with it. I think that's what we learn from the mystics as well, that there is no other way out than through. You cannot go around, you cannot go under, you cannot go over, you have to go through it. But in going through it, you get something, you learn something. And I think, as what Keisha was saying as well, it doesn't need to be all on you. It's not an individual journey. You don't need to carry it alone. we need to help each other through. But I also think there's no, this doesn't mean that we don't value our own core selves. There's a tradition of the Prophet Muhammad that I really like as well, because I think in doing work on social justice and climate, I don't know, I mean, in my experience sometimes, even with opponents within my own family system, within my own friendship circles, who are like people saying, why are you doing all this? Why are you scaremongering? Just making everyone afraid. You're just like, you know, you're just making a mountain out of a molehill. And I feel like recently I'm experiencing this as a kind of gaslighting, and I don't know where I stand with it. But a tradition from the Prophet Muhammad that I like is that one of the companions goes to the Prophet, peace be upon him, with a question about sin and righteousness. So he asked the Prophet about his opinion on sin and righteousness. And in response, Muhammad prods his companion's chest 3 times and says, ask your heart, ask yourself. And he does this 3 times, ask your heart, ask yourself. And after the 3rd time, Muhammad says, look, righteousness is that which the heart feels at ease with and the soul is content with. And sin is that which troubles the heart and causes doubt in the chest, even if people pass a fatwa or an opinion, a legal opinion of permissibility for you and give you these legal verdicts. So ask your heart. And this is a very important teaching in Islam that has so many elements of, you know, thinking about jurisprudence and what a fatwa means in terms of a legal opinion. And the Prophet is saying, actually, the legal opinion has to come from your heart. And I think that can sound a bit woolly, but if we think of the heart as where we nurture these wounds, these core wounds that we've had, and if we also think of ourselves as not just self-contained beings that don't depend on anyone else, but if we think of ourselves as in the African, you know, concept of Ubuntu, I am because you are, then yes, you do have the wisdom contained within yourself as well. You do have the means to get through this. You just need to pay attention to the heart. And if that grief and gaslighting is coming from the people around you, you should know that this is within you as well. You have this divine spark. Anyway, that's what helps me. So that's what I offer.
Thank you. So we're kind of getting we're getting close to the end of our time, but I have a question that I'd love to end on, which is, it would be great to make a little bit of space just to talk about love, which after all is the heart of what faith communities are about, and which is also why activists do the work that they do. I'd love to just hear maybe kind of a minute and a half or something each from you both about how do you see the connection between imagination and love? Where do those two overlap? Why does one need the other? What's the dynamic between those two things? Keisha.
I think about imagination and love both in terms of what expands me, what gives me space to imagine a new way to care for another, including myself. The test that I've started to use is, do my eyes light up? That's a sign I love, and or a sign that I'm in my creative imagination. I find that when I'm in that space, it's not foggy, it's not woolly, it's very, very clear. And the more I listen well, the better off I am. It's also not an idealistic state. I can hope, but it's more about my willingness to see whatever it is, whatever the scenario is, in its best possible expression. And this reminds me of this wrestling that we do as people in social transformation around whether there's a moral arc or a justice arc that's bending automatically or automagically, as I sometimes say. I don't know that there is, and I don't know that justice is inevitable. I tell myself the story that it might be. I tell myself the story that it's our natural state and we're reclaiming our natural state or restoring what has been lost. And it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. It matters what I'm impelled to do as a result of the story I choose to live into. So I ask, what's the cost to my ability to imagine and my ability to love well if I refuse to act in ways that help me or my communities or my world? I was moved by a line from the Bhagavad Gita, which says that we only have a right to our labor and not to the fruits of our labor. All we can give is our action. We're not guaranteed anything as a result thereof. But love doesn't ask whether it's guaranteed results. It just loves. And so like thinking about imagination as that which helps me see our world, see our potential in their best possible light, gives me room to imagine a future for myself in that world and imagine what my best actions can be to help us get there.
Thank you. And Shannon.
I love that, Keisha. I mean, okay, for me, I responded by thinking about Qawwali music. Some of you might know Qawwali music. It's devotional Muslim music in the Sufi tradition. It is extremely ecstatic and sensuous and joyful. It's almost like going to a rave sometimes, because people get up and dance. You know, you have whirling dervishes sometimes telling people to get off their feet and dance. And these are songs of intense love and joy for God, for the Prophet. But it's not just about that. It's not just about these songs being only about me singing to God and therefore I'm saved. They celebrate things like, you know, there's a passage in the Quran in the 7th chapter, Al-A'raf, which is the chapter of discernment, where it's kind of a divine dialogue, the primordial covenant between God and creation, where God asks a rhetorical question, Alastu bi rabbikum, and who is your Lord? It's a rhetorical question, but we creation, not just humans, not just us now, but all our ancestors, everyone who was before and everyone who is to come, says, Bal Shahidna, we testify. And there's this call and response that makes these Sufi mystics in their songs and poetry say, look, remember who you are, remember who we all are. We are born of this divine covenant, all of us, each and every one of us. And I think when you ask about the connection between love and imagination, I think this is what really gets me. These sorts of works within all traditions. I mean, for me, I'm talking about Qawwali music, but for everyone else here, there will be some tradition of beauty or art that you know that is sacred as well. That kind of draws all these links together in a way that's just, you know, I'm running out of words now. I don't know how to describe it, but this connection between love and joy and connection and imagination, it's there, right?
Beautiful, beautiful. What a gorgeous way to bring us to a close. And I'd really like to thank you both so much. This has been an absolute delight, and I'd really like to thank you both so much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Keisha.
Thank you, Shannon.
So my thanks also to Nicole Diroff for helping to make this possible, to everyone at BTS, as well as everyone here at Convocation for joining us on this journey, and also to everyone who subscribes and who supports this podcast and what we do here. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then do consider getting involved. And my thanks as always to Ben Adicott for sound production, and we'll see you next time. And to finish, we're going to do a beautiful thing where we're going to unmute everybody's microphones who are on this call so that everybody can offer their thanks to our wonderful speakers here today in whatever way they would like to. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
And blessings.
Fantastic.
All
Oh
of you.
my
Thank
Hi,
you for
Mary.
sharing your story.
It was beautiful.
I'm a life that was changed.
Bless you.
Loved it.
I have no words. Thank you
you.
so much. So
You're
inspiring.
awesome.
Don't stop.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Blessings.
Blessings and peace and grace.
Thank you so much.
All rock.
My first podcast.
Woo!
Yay!
Ubuntu rocks.
Thank you, Rob and Keisha and Shannon. It has been a real privilege to be part of something that will be broader, that will be broadcast broader than this Zoom room today. Thank you for your wisdom and your questions. We are so grateful. And I know some of you need to run to next things, so feel free, presenters.
Well, thanks so much. We'll be in touch, and you were amazing. Thank you.
For anyone here who is a regular podcast listener or an aspiring podcast listener, I invite you to check out both Rob's podcast and the BTS Center's podcast, which is co-hosted by me and Ben Yashua Davis and produced by Peterson Toscano, who has been here with us throughout Convocation. Our podcast, called Climate Changed, explores faith, life, and love in a climate-changed world, and includes guests like Veronis Miles, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Craig Santos Perez, and many more. Friends, we are moving into the final arc of this Convocation gathering. Up next is a sing-along with Reggie that will go until around 2:15 Eastern. Then at 2:30 Eastern, we'll have a final opportunity to gather in your affinity groups. If it's comfortable for you, I invite you to actually stay on Zoom between now and 2:30. So rather than logging off, just turn your video off, as it'll help us get ahead on breakout room assignments. If you have any questions or comments you want to share, please feel free to do so in the chat while we sing. Reggie.